Growing up, I was kind of bad at video games. Like, really, really bad. I remember the first time I played Super Mario Galaxy, I got a game over on the first planet. Twice. Not the first level, planet. Not my proudest moment. I can remember countless occasions where I would have to pester my dad to help me beat a section of a game I was stuck on. This happened a lot with QuickTime events in particular, because neither me or my brothers were very good at them. While that method got me through some games, it did mean I was pretty much on my own whenever my dad was away at work or otherwise not available. I can remember a couple times getting so mad at a game that I would start screaming and crying, which got me grounded more times than I'd care to admit. I've always been a pretty stubborn person though, so even if I got stuck on something, I would usually keep trying until I got through it. That mindset helped me slowly get better at games the more I played, and nowadays I think I'm pretty confident as a gamer. Difficulty in games can be a little contentious at times, but in general I prefer when a game isn't afraid to test you from time to time. The right amount of difficulty can push you to completely interact with the game's systems and learn them inside and out, which as a result can make them more engaging, and beating them becomes all the more satisfying. It's for that reason that I've started to play a lot of games on a higher difficulty, if not the highest, so that I'm forced to pay attention and fully interact with the game on its own terms. This is what I did when playing Sonic Frontiers when that came out in late 2022. Wait, it's been 2 years already? What the fuck? If you saw my video on that game, you might remember I was a little disappointed with how that game handled its difficulty. Even when I was limiting myself by keeping my stats at level 1, I felt the enemies had too little health and offered very little resistance, which neutered a lot of the potential I saw in the combat system. But it got me thinking about my time with the older Sonic games and their difficulties. I've played these games countless times over the years, so I can beat them pretty easily nowadays, but I can clearly remember getting stuck on many occasions as a kid. I can remember spending weeks on Crazy Gadget in Sonic Adventure 2 thanks to that gravity switching section at the end. Pretty much every level in Unleashed felt like a triumph for 8-year-old me with both the day and night stages. I didn't really understand what made a game bad back when I played Sonic 06, so I remember putting countless hours in the game, thinking it was really hard instead of it being, well, 06. On the whole though, I think these games are pretty fair with their difficulty curves. They're pretty simple to get through but difficult to master. But I realize that I've never really dabbled in the dedicated hard modes these games have to offer. There's 5 games that feature hard modes across the series: Sonic Adventure 2, Heroes, Shadow, 06, and Unleashed. A majority of them are locked behind 100% completion or behind a paywall, and since I was a dumb kid with very little money, there was no way I was going to be able to play these back then. But now that I'm a Sonic god with a disposable income, I think it would be fun to finally check these modes out and see if they live up to the hype. So let's take a look at the hard modes the Sonic series has to offer, and I'm going to be ranking them too based off a few different factors: how fun they are, how much they enhance the original stages, and whether or not the difficulty is a fair challenge or just makes the stages annoying and tedious. But before we get into that though, I really quickly want to plug my new Patreon. This video has been in production for about 2 or 3 months at this point, as there was a lot of prep work that needed to be done before I could get into the hard modes proper. I had to 100% both Heroes and Shadow, since their hard modes are locked behind getting all of their A ranks. I guess I could have just downloaded a save, but fuck you. As for 06 and Unleashed, I had to buy their respective DLC packs, the former of which was a pain in the ass because the Xbox 360 store is a nightmare. Or was, I guess. Rest in pieces, sweet prince. A lot of time and money goes into making more in-depth videos like this, so if you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a channel member or patron. In return, you'll get access to early videos, alternate thumbnails, and updates on future projects. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, the links will be in the description. And I've also got a Ko-Fi link if you'd rather make a one-time donation. If not, I still appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. Just make sure all your windows are locked tonight. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to the video. Sonic Adventure 2 has the most accessible hard mode out of all of the games. Each level has 5 optional missions you can complete. They vary from character to character, but they have objectives like collecting a certain amount of rings, finding a hidden Chow, beating the stage in a certain time limit, and finally the hard mode. These are probably the simplest out of all of the hard modes in this video. That's not to say they're bad or anything, in fact I still find them quite fun, but they don't really do a whole lot to change each individual stage. The amount that changes depends on the character type the stage is for. I think the speed stages have the best implementation. In general, they all follow a pretty similar formula. They have stronger enemies, and some platform layouts are slightly different. Some stages are more interesting than others. Pyramid Cave, for example, has this cool section where you have to throw the key to a locked door up these platforms to progress. Green Forest is also pretty cool because the extra obstacles and remove level objects make you interact with the level a little bit differently, like having to grind on these vine rails in this section. I also like Crazy Gadget a lot because it plays around more with the gravity gimmick, with platforming challenges while upside down, and one homing attack chain that's upside down too. Other than that though, most changes are only really there to mess with your muscle memory. There's this one in Green Forest where they remove a ramp, and that one always gets me. Crazy Gadget switches around some of its gravity switches, and Skyrail has a lot of small object changes that really mess with me for whatever reason. But once you adjust to it, it's not all that bad, and it's kind of fun having to relearn the stage all over again. I really like the idea of the hard mode for the treasure hunting stages. The new Emerald Shard locations make really good use of the game's extra power-ups, which is something you don't really see in the main game. For example, there's a lot of pieces that are only collectible through a spring that's hidden unless you use the treasure scope. There's an underwater section in Death Chamber that requires the air necklace, and since there's 2 whole shards down there, you probably won't have enough air without it. While I like the idea of these variants on paper, the downside is there's only one set of locations for each stage. So once you find where the Emerald Shard is and how to get them, it's pretty easy to cheese the stage's A rank. I've always thought SA2 was at its best when the level design works in tandem with the ranking system to make you interact with it more consciously. But for a majority of the Emerald Shards, once you find how they want you to get them, it just becomes a matter of resetting the stage and blitzing through it for an easy A rank. They're not bad, I guess. Some of the Emerald Shards are in really creative spots. I just don't think they really capture what I like about the normal treasure hunting stages. The mech stages hard mode are easily the least interesting of the 3 types. These stages are pretty much identical to their normal counterparts as far as I can tell, with the only differences being a larger number of enemies. I get that platforming wasn't a huge focus in the normal mech stages to begin with, but just spamming enemies everywhere makes the stages feel a little superfluous. There's a few moments of interesting platforming in these stages, mostly where you have to hover to navigate around removed platforms, but otherwise they're pretty much the same as the normal mech stages, just slightly more tedious. Overall, the hard mode in SA2, while basic, is still pretty fun. While there are a handful of interesting changes and additions here and there, overall the changes are quite minimal and don't do an awful lot to stand out from their regular variants. I guess that also means they're close to their original stages in terms of quality, so it could be worse. These next 2 are going to be lumped together, as they're really similar structurally speaking, and my thoughts are similar across both. Out of all of the different hard modes I looked at for this video, these 2 were definitely the ones I was the most curious about. Not only due to the work that I had to put in to unlock them, but also because I heard a lot of good things about the 2 modes from other people over the years. Those 2 hard modes being Super Hard Mode in Sonic Heroes and Expert Mode in Shadow the Hedgehog. So now that I've finally played them, are they any good? I mean, they're alright, I guess. I think what really disappointed me about these 2 modes is that they don't change up the level design as much as I was expecting. That's not to say there aren't changes, but I can only think of a few examples of changes that really affected the way I interacted with the level. A lot of the times it felt like I was just playing the same levels again, which was kinda disappointing. This is the most evident with Shadow the Hedgehog's levels, as a lot of those are at their most interesting when they're built around the different hero and villain objectives. So when you take those away and make the focus just getting to the goal ring, they all start to sort of blend together. The biggest thing that sets these modes apart from the others in the series is that they act mostly as marathon modes, meaning you play each stage back to back until you get to the end. Each one will make you restart if you run out of lives, which I guess is a decent incentive to perform well, but personally I didn't find myself dying enough to really worry about it. Maybe I'm just too goated, what can I say? What really kills these 2 modes for me is the lack of the ranking system. Like, I understand not wanting to include one after forcing you to A-rank every stage to even unlock these modes in the first place, but I think the ranking system adds a lot to each game, since it adds an incentive to fully interact with the level. But as it is now, you can ignore pretty much every obstacle and enemy and just beeline to the goal ring. It's not as exciting, personally speaking. I think a good compromise would have been to remove extra lives in the stages and the ones you get by collecting 100 rings, and instead granting them through getting a high score. Maybe the A rank equivalent could reward you with 3 or so lives, with the payout diminishing with every lower rank. This way there's still that incentive to play the stages as intended, while still having that pressure of a game over forcing you to restart. I don't want to make it sound like I hated my time with these modes. They were still pretty fun to play through, and there's a lot of smaller things I like about both. In Heroes, for example, the enemies on average are much tougher than in the regular stages, so it makes the unique attributes you get with level ups more pronounced, and it makes the Team Blast even more useful than it already was. Shadow's Expert mode allows you to use the keys from their regular stages to unlock the special doors, which can give you a small edge if you bother to look for them in the main game, and I think that's really neat. I also really like the way Expert mode is framed in-game. It's presented as Shadow's training to prove himself as the ultimate lifeform, and each stage starts with these hint bubbles that have characters from all across the game encouraging Shadow. Some of these are really funny, like being encouraged by the fucking President of the United States. The gun commander apologizes for his actions in the main game and even invites Shadow over for dinner. And then there's this. While these hard modes don't particularly wow me as much as I thought they would, I still had a pretty decent time with them. Having to play all of the stages in a row in a marathon context is a neat concept, and something I think would be fun to bring back in a future game. Their biggest flaw is being locked behind A rank completion, since by the time you unlock them, you've probably played each stage to death, and I don't think either mode does enough to really stand apart from the experience you get by playing the main game. And without any kind of a ranking system to encourage you to fully interact with the stages, I find they aren't as interesting as their normal counterparts. Thankfully, the next game we're going to look at does a much better job of distinguishing its hard mode from its normal stages, both for better and for worse. Mostly for worse. At this point, I'm sure Sonic 06 needs no introduction. Something something killed the franchise, something something ambition and passion, you know the drill. Despite its reputation, the game surprisingly got a decent amount of post-launch DLC. It's not anything super crazy. They added a boss rush for every campaign, and a new stage focused on the side characters, but the most interesting of them is the very hard mode. By default, the game already has a hard mode, and I tried a couple of those stages, but they didn't really feel that different from the standard ones, so we're just going to look at the very hard mode instead. These do a lot to make themselves stand out from the base version of the stages, and in classic 06 fashion, they're also not very good. Sonic stages aren't too bad. Dare I say, some of them are actually pretty good. For 06 standards at least. They're easily the most interesting out of the 3 characters. Most, if not all, of his stages have a pretty cool twist to them. For example, in Wave Ocean you play the stage backwards, coupled with some tighter platforming. This one is actually one of my favorites. There's a bunch of these sections where you have whales breaking the platforms behind you that are surprisingly tense. These also really lag the game for some reason. At first I thought it might just be my Xbox and it's getting kinda old at this point. But no, I looked at some other footage and it's just like that for some reason. I guess that's Sonic 06 for you. Another one I really liked was Dusty Desert. It's the same layout as the normal stage, but you have to navigate it without Elise, which makes the platforming a little more challenging since most of the sand is a bottomless pit without the force field thingy. The other stages follow a similar format. Flame Core is also played in reverse, Tropical Jungle still has Elise, but there's a new section that you don't normally go to in Sonic's version of the stage. Aquatic Base has this cool section at the end where you have to go back and forth in the final room, defeating wave after wave of enemies. Sonic's very hard stages can be pretty fun to play when you're not dealing with the classic 06 jank, which is more than I can say for the other 2 characters. I don't really have too much to say about Silver's stages. Of the 3 campaigns, his stages are the ones with the least number of changes. The only thing I really noticed were an increased number of enemies. They got rid of the ball puzzle at the end of Dusty Desert, which is really funny, and in Crisis City you play Blaze's section as Silver instead. The rest of the stages were more or less the same. They do have some new enemy types here and there that aren't in any other campaign to my knowledge, but otherwise it's just Silver's base levels with an assload of enemies and minor level design adjustments. Nothing super interesting in my opinion. Shadow, though. Oh my sweet summer child, what did they do to you? Like his main campaign, Shadow's very hard levels have more of a focus on combat and vehicles. This on its own isn't too bad, but paired with some other additions to this mode, it quickly cripples any amount of fun you could have with these stages. The extra focus on vehicles shouldn't really be a bad thing on paper, but because of how jank they are, they make the stages more frustrating than it's worth. Like this hoverbike section was a pain in the ass because I was constantly getting trolled by pillars falling from off screen. In Radical Train, there's this section where you have to use the motorcycle to shoot the train and destroy it before it escapes, but they increased the amount of health on it, so I was having a hard time destroying it before it got away. At least that's what I thought before my winning attempt, where it died extremely quickly, so I can't tell if the train actually had more health or if my bullets were just missing somehow. The hang glider sections are way more annoying than in the base game because they're flooded with enemies and obstacles, and they were really hard for me to avoid because up and down movement is inverted while left and right isn't, which was really hard for me to adjust to. For some reason in very hard mode, every one of Shadow's levels have extra Rouge and Omega sections, which are all extremely infuriating. The side characters are already one of 06's weakest aspects, but this DLC putting an extra focus on them makes their issues stand out even more. Rouge usually has a focus on exploration, looking for a set of keys to unlock the way forward, but they want you to climb these cluttered areas to look for multiple sets of keys this time, and coupled with an added focus on combat, this makes her sections extremely tedious. Rouge is only able to deal damage with her bombs, which you have to stop in your tracks to throw at one enemy at a time, and because you have to stop in place to throw the bombs, you're constantly opening yourself up to damage, so it's really easy to get mowed down in a matter of seconds in the busier sections. These sections are also frustrating from an exploration perspective. You'd think that a character that can fly and climb walls would make exploration fairly simple, but for some ungodly reason you just can't climb on some walls in these areas. I assume it has something to do with the fact that these areas weren't designed with Rouge in mind, so the walls aren't coded to allow her to climb on them. But they went out of their way to add the climbing property to a few select objects in these areas, so why not do it with everything else? There's no indication for what walls or objects you can and cannot climb, so you'll often approach a wall after falling or something to try and save yourself, only to find that Rouge slides off it like she's coated in butter. Coupled with the regular jank that comes with Rouge's sections, like getting stuck on walls for example, these sections become extremely tedious and break the pace of most stages, and yet they're still somehow better than whatever is going on with Omega. On paper, Omega's sections should be easier than Rouge's, since they're mostly focused on combat, but then when you start to actually play as him, you'll quickly realize that his attacks just don't work most of the time. I don't know if I was doing something wrong, but I swear I could not get Omega's basic energy attack to consistently lock onto enemies. And the air attack has a really limited range and would just whiff enemies more often than it would hit. And since all of Omega's sections are reliant on combat, not being able to hit the enemies is kind of a big deal. All of these issues compound into one another and make each stage extremely frustrating and drag like hell. I swear a good run of these stages was taking me upwards of 10 to 15 minutes to complete. The very hard mode in 06 is a wildly inconsistent bag. The biggest issue with the mode is unfortunately the same issue 06 has as a whole. It just doesn't fucking work most of the time. A lot of the difficulty in these stages, more often than not, comes from jank or things just not working rather than intentional stage design. While I can somewhat enjoy the Sonic stages when everything works properly, because this is 06, things are bound to break at any moment. I had so many times where Sonic would just dash over a platform I was trying to land on. I can't tell you how many times I got trolled by the pillars falling off screen in Shadow's Kingdom Valley, and Silver stages drag like nothing else because they spam enemies everywhere and combat sucks with him. Interestingly, the score requirements for S ranks have been doubled, which on paper would be a really neat addition, but the time bonus for each stage has also been inflated, which pretty much negates the change anyway, so I don't know why they even bothered. In a better functioning game, I could see these stages being somewhat enjoyable, dare I say fun, but unfortunately as they are now, they're extremely tedious and drag like nothing else. Out of all the hard modes featured in this video, Sonic Unleashes DLC is the one I had the most experience with. I was able to snag one or two of the level packs as a kid with some leftover gift card money here and there, but the regular stages were pretty hard for me already back then, so I didn't end up playing too many of them since they were so much harder. Now that I'm older and better at the game, I've had a much easier time getting into these levels. And yeah, I'm just gonna get this out of the way now, this is my favorite hard mode by far. These levels do a fantastic job of finding a middle ground between being difficult but still being fun to blast through. And that's not even considering the amount of effort it takes to S-rank most of these stages. The DLC is split into multiple level packs, one for each continent, and they each add a handful of levels for both regular Sonic and the Hedgehog. There's generally two types of levels in these DLC packs. Some are harder remixes of pre-existing stages, and others are entirely new ones. The remix levels admittedly are a little bit of a mixed bag. Similar to SA2's hard mode, these will slightly alter the level design to make it harder and mess with your pre-established muscle memory. The vast majority of these remixes are for the day stages, and while a lot of them are pretty fair tests of your skill and reaction times, others mostly resort to spamming spikes and enemies everywhere. I think Skyscraper Scamper, Savannah Citadel, and Rooftop Run are pretty good examples of the latter. Each of these levels tend to spam spikes and other hazards seemingly at random, which makes avoiding them more annoying than it is a test of skill. On the flip side, you have levels like Windmill Isle and Arid Sands that stick to moving or removing platforms to make the stage more difficult. There's a really evil trap near the beginning of Windmill Isle where if you take this upper shortcut and hit the rainbow ring, it'll send you flying into a wall of spikes if you don't stomp fast enough, which definitely caught me off guard the first couple of times. It was really funny when it happened. When done right, these stages feel like a really nice revamp of the existing stages, but at worst they make the stages more annoying than difficult. Thankfully though, there's a bunch of new levels on top of these, most of which are really fun. A lot of these extra stages are pretty short compared to the main ones, but to compensate they have a denser concentration of difficult platforming, which makes them really fun to master. Windmill Isle 1-4 is one of my favorite stages in the game now. It focuses on the quick step, which gives the stage this intense flow, with shortcuts and rings scattered all over the various lanes. The stage forces you to weave between different obstacles and hazards, my favorite being this set of fire pillars that alternates as you run through them. The stage is only around a minute long, but it was really fun memorizing the hazard patterns to barely skirt by them. It's some of the most fun I've had with the Sonic stage in a while, and getting the S rank was a legitimate but fulfilling challenge. What I like about a lot of these stages is that they focus on specific abilities or set pieces, and offer a lot of unique platforming opportunities centered around them. There's this one in Savannah Citadel that centers around wall jumping between these fire pillars, and it's really exhilarating to nail down. There's another level in Rooftop Run that has you jumping off enemies floating above the city below you. It's a really striking visual, and makes the sections where you get these intense bursts of speed all that more exhilarating. There's a handful of stages that have you lap around an area a couple times to get the goal ring to spawn, with level design changing with each lap. Cool Edge 2-2 is a good example of this, with the game switching between 2D and 3D during each lap and changing the focus of the platforming, whether it be bouncing off enemy chains, running on water, or using the bobsled. Another one I really like was Rooftop Run 2-2. It's a remix of a pre-existing bonus stage from the main game, but it's a lot more tense than most stages. It also has one of my favorite visual aesthetics in the game, being set in a cloudy day with sunbeams peeking through the clouds. A lot of these DLC levels offer slightly different visual aesthetics actually. Some are set at sunrise or other slightly different times of day than their normal counterparts. This game was already one of my favorite looking Sonic games, but these little additions make it stand out even more. That's not to say the stages are perfect. There's a couple that I think are a little too busy for their own good, if that makes any sense. Like there's so many obstacles they want you to dodge, or there's so much going on screen that I get overwhelmed. But for the most part, the new stages made for this DLC are really good, and thankfully that quality carries over to the night stages. Unlike the day stages, most of the night levels are brand new, with only a few remixes. In general, the night stages are all really good. The only one I actively dislike is this combat-oriented one in Windmill Isle. All of the enemies have their stats inflated, so unless you have a maxed out Hedgehog, you'll be dealing chip damage and taking heavy hits. There's a bunch of healing items around, so it's still doable, it's just more tedious than I would like. The rest of them though are awesome. There's a lot more original ones here than in the day stages, and like those they're a little bit shorter than your average night stage, with a much greater focus on platforming. In these stages, environmental objects like pots and barrels now hold experience points, and in general the EXP yields are much greater than that of the base game. For example, in the first DLC stage, I got close to 40 experience levels, which is more than you'd get in most of the full-length stages in the base game. Even with this increased EXP yield though, I wasn't able to max out a single stat after playing all of the stages, which is just so Sonic Unleashed. But other than that, I don't really have a whole lot to say about the night stages in the DLC. It's pretty much just more of the Hedgehog, so if you liked him in the base game, you'll like him here. And if you didn't, I don't know, don't play them then, I'm not your mom. The DLC stages in Unleashed are overall really solid. While there are some that are more annoying than I would like, at their best they offer a really nice spin on their pre-existing stages, and offer more intricate and engaging platforming. I definitely recommend you give them a shot if you haven't already. There's a lot of really good stages in there, and you're missing out if you decide to just skip them. So after playing all of the hard modes the Sonic series has to offer, I'd have to rank them as follows. The bottom of the list is easily Sonic 06's Very Hard mode. I know, very bold to say Sonic 06 is bad. While some stages are neat conceptually, all of them have the same issues 06 is fundamentally plagued with, which makes the whole experience more tedious and frustrating than it's worth. No amount of ambition or passion is going to save this one, boys. Shadow's levels in particular are soul draining, and I don't think you could pay me to do them again. But you could try. Above that is Shadow the Hedgehog's Expert mode. While not outright bad by any means, I think the marathon structure sort of takes away what made these levels unique in the first place. Stripped of the different mission objectives, the levels become fairly basic and uninteresting, and without a ranking system to push me to interact with them in any meaningful way, the whole thing quickly becomes dull and monotonous. Next we have the Sonic Heroes Super Hard mode, which shares a lot in common with Shadow's Expert mode. The lack of a ranking system is kind of what neuters it for me personally, but the stronger level design and the character level mechanic does enough to make it a good deal more engaging than Expert mode, so it edges it out. Then in second place we have SA2's Hard mode. While the changes in this mode aren't anything to write home about, they still do a good job making the levels harder in a unique way that still feels fair. And the presence of the ranking system encourages me to interact with the stage more. And then finally, for the totally objective, unbiased, 100% best Sonic Hard mode, we have the Sonic Unleashed Adventure Packs. The levels in Unleashed were already some of my favorites in the series, and while some don't make the transition as gracefully as others, and some of the new ones are a tad frustrating, I think the good far outweigh the bad, and they're some of the most fun I've had with a Sonic game in a while. While playing through all the hard modes for this video, I was able to come to terms with what I think the series is missing at present when it comes to difficulty. While a lot of the difficulty on these hard modes could be seen as artificial, let's be real, stuff like placing spikes and harder enemies all over the place is not the way to make a fun, hard Sonic stage. I found that my favorite of these modes were the ones that push the player to interact with and get the most out of each stage. While the individual stages in games like SA2 and Unleashed are easy enough to complete on their own, for me they become their most engaging when I'm going for their highest ranks. The harder difficulty in these modes forced me to truly learn and understand each stage before I could even think about getting a high score. And finally nailing that perfect run and seeing the S rank pop up on screen is some of the most fun I've had with a Sonic game in a long time. I'm not trying to say that every stage going forward needs to be super difficult or anything to be fun, but I do think that engagement is what the series has been missing as of late. Ever since Generations, the highest ranks have been pretty easy to get even on a first attempt. And while that game has stellar level design and requires you to at least beat the stage without dying to get an S rank, I can't help but feel it would be more satisfying if the highest rank took a little more work to get. It's often understated just how important a good score-based ranking system can be for a Sonic game. Sonic games on the whole thrive from the easy-to-learn, hard-to-master sort of appeal, and the score bank ranking system is the embodiment of that philosophy. The stages are often at their best when you have to interact with a stage on top of fair play to get the highest rank. The mere presence of a score-based ranking system isn't what makes these stages good. I mean, just look at Forces. But it does influence the way these stages are designed, and even the way the player interacts with them. It's not just about getting to the goal as fast as possible. The ranking system makes it just as important to accrue points while doing that, whether that's through tricks, rainbow rings, enemies, or what else can give you points in these games. It's the balancing out of doing all that while getting to the goal quickly that makes a good Sonic stage as engaging as they are. Going back as far as SA2, the ranks are still pretty demanding for the average player. They aren't intended to be something you get in one go, rather something you spend at least a little bit of time learning the stage and its quirks to get. Look at a stage like Metal Harbor. Taking the normal path on the rocket section might be faster, but taking this secret one to get to the top part of the rocket gives you more points, and it's pretty much required for the A rank. Same thing for a stage like Pyramid Cave, that has these extra rings you can go out of your way for to jump into to get bonus points. In Heroes, you get a ton of points by beating enemies in quick succession and going through rainbow rings with your entire team. The score system in Shadow the Hedgehog is interesting if you're going for a hero or dark mission, because both have different score tallies and actually subtract from one another at the end of the stage. So getting too high of a dark score while playing a hero mission, for example, will result in a lower overall score. Going for a good rank on a specific mission requires you to manage how much of each mission you're doing to maintain a high score for your desired allegiance, which can be difficult sometimes because progression is locked behind enemies of the opposite faction. While the boost games definitely have more of a focus on going as fast as possible, you're still encouraged to interact with the stage thanks to the enemy and ring bonuses. In all of these games, your score resets to 0 when you die, so to get a high rank you have to do all of these things in one go without dying. It opens up countless opportunities for meaningful, on-the-fly decision making. Do I go for these bonus points at the risk of dying, or do I stay on the safer path at the cost of a potential score bonus? For that reason, I think changing the ranking system to be time-based instead of score-based in Frontiers is a huge detriment to the overall feel of these stages, since it completely changes the way you interact with them. Instead of having to fully interact with the level environment while keeping up a fast pace, you're now incentivized to skip as much of the level as possible to get the best rank. I think it's telling that even in the best stages of Frontiers, the best way to get the S rank is to just outright skip stuff like enemies and rings. Now granted, in this game in particular it's also due to some odd physics changes and stuff like the homing attack rebound, but I think the principle still stands. I find it so easy to go back to SA2, Heroes, and Unleashed because the level designs in those games feel like intricately designed obstacle courses. They're tailor-made to allow you to seamlessly chain together stylish actions that give you points. The appeal of Sonic to me has never inherently been going as fast as possible, but being able to interact with the stage in a stylish, engaging manner while also maintaining that sense of speed. While speed is an important factor, it's still more than possible to get a good rank while going a little slower as long as you meaningfully engage with the level design. But with the new time-based system, the goal has shifted to skipping as much of the stage as possible for the best rank. And while that can be fun in its own right, I don't find it as satisfying as the games with the score-based system. Additions like the Frontiers Spin Dash only exemplify this issue, since now it's easier than ever to just fly over everything with little effort, which as time goes on has continued to sour in my mind. It feels like such a waste to make these intricate level designs with tons of hidden paths and shortcuts, only to tell the player to skip all of that if they want to get a good rank, which is even further incentivized in games like Frontiers since they have progression items tied to the highest rank. I'm hoping that with the next game, assuming it has traditional Sonic stages to begin with, we can go back to the score-based ranking system, so that there's more of an incentive to interact with the stage on a fundamental level. Sonic stages are at their best when they reward you for experimenting and showing off in flashy ways, and I feel like that's a key aspect in the series that's missing at the moment. I'm really glad I finally sat down to play these Sonic hard modes. Even if some of them aren't great, it helped me understand what, to me at least, makes a good Sonic level. And so for that reason, I recommend you give them a shot if you're at all interested. You never know, you might gain a newfound appreciation for your favorite games just like I did.